It's becoming my mommy is the best. Supermom will be next. She helps mommy get their smiles back, their giggles back, and their sparkle back. You wait for the straw. Whoosh. Get ready for that super discovery and super strong.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Healing for the Soul podcast. It is your go-to resource for parents and want-to-be parents who strive for success without sacrificing connection and well-being. Each episode delivers actionable strategies and inspiring insights to help you build emotional intelligence and resilience for yourself and for your family. Strengthen relationships with yourself, your partner, and your children. Master parenting as an entrepreneur, even while raising young children. Discover life and parenting hacks that simplify your journey. Explore hypnosis and other healing modalities for a deeper transformation. This podcast isn't just about parenting and a fertility journey. It's about creating harmony, wealth, and alignment in every area of life. Let's get started.
This is season 7, and I am your host, Supermom, Robin Stoltman. And today's guest is Steven Eichenblatt. He is the author of the bestseller, Pretend They Are Dead, A Father's Search for the Truth, and he is also a graduate of the Florida State University and the University of Florida College of Law. His journey took him from a house of continuous abuse, hitting rock bottom, moving to Israel and back to the United States after discovering that self-help means helping yourself because no one can do it for you. A practicing trial attorney and father of 5, he has spent over 35 years advocating for children as a pro bono guardian ad litem and representing families of first responders killed on 9/11. As a founding partner of Page and Eichenblatt, he has received multiple awards for legal excellence and community work supporting children. He has 5 children, including 1 adopted, and he lives with his wife in Orlando, Florida. Steve loves fishing, nature, tennis, animals, and college football. And he has ran several marathons to raise money for leukemia and tries to live by Teddy Roosevelt's famous, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out the strong man's stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails with daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And that's by Theodore Roosevelt. We call him Teddy Roosevelt.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for being here. I really, really appreciate it. That is quite the accomplishment that you've come from, that you've done.
Yeah, thank you for having me. First of all, I know it's been a journey. It's certainly been a journey to get to where I am now, and I've enjoyed sharing my book with people because it's really getting a really great response and helping people. I'm finding that it's actually helping people. So that's the most important thing.
Well, and that is very important. So in your book, being this author of Pretend They Are Dead, really, what did it take for you to write this? Because I'm thinking, like what you said, the self-help means helping yourself because no one can do it for you. Is that part of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part of my life. It's kind of, when you grow up in a household where there's a lot of trauma and you're constantly, looking for, the next blow up, next minefield. And I became, even as a high school kid, I stopped going to class. I started doing drugs. I just, spent as much time away from my house as I could because it wasn't a safe place to be. And eventually I realized that, there's that point in time where you kind of hit rock bottom, or you're going to hit rock bottom if you don't do something about it. And so I wound up in Israel, living on a kibbutz, which a lot of people have heard more about since the October 7th stuff. And that's when I started doing a lot of reading and realized, no one's going to do it for me. I don't have a real good support system, and I need to get off my tailbone and get to work if I want to accomplish my goals.
So it sounds like going to Israel, that was the turnaround?
Definitely, it was definitely a big part of the turnaround is just, getting the, I wasn't sure what direction I was headed in. Um, I was in college, but I wasn't doing well. They invited me to leave after a while, and I didn't even know why I was there. And I started doing a lot of reading, and I read a couple books by James Michener, one called The Source, which is about Israel, and then Chesapeake and Centennial, which were about, the USA. And I decided, I wanted to make a difference and help people.
That's a worthy cause that keeps you alive, that gives you that sense of purpose. Because I know, like, a lot
Right.
of people, they don't have the sense of purpose. They're like, why am I doing this after time? I think that's where that midlife crisis hits so many people, at the same time. And so I wanted to know a little bit more about your background outside of, what we started with for here that brought you
Yeah,
to this
like
book.
sure. Like as a child, I was my biological father left me when I was young, and he just dropped us off one day and never came back. I had a twin sister and a biological brother, and then my mother got remarried we didn't know that she was getting married, but my mother got remarried to a man who had four kids, and he wound up adopting us after my father gave us up. So there was seven of us, and well, nine of us total, including my parents. And he was a very difficult person. He was violent. He had rules that he imposed on us. For example, we weren't allowed to walk in the front door. We had to walk around back. We weren't allowed to sit on the furniture. We never ate a meal with my parents. We weren't allowed in the kitchen when they were in there. And, he had a terrible temper. And so you're constantly, I was a kid, you're just, okay, this is what my life became all of a sudden. And my biological father lived in the same town, and just, as a father myself, I couldn't imagine not talking to my kids for a couple of days, let alone just dropping them off and just never saying anything.
That'd be extremely hard. Because, like you said, being a father yourself, you can't imagine just doing that. I could never imagine doing that with my kids. I mean, like, there's times you get frustrated, but it's like there's a difference between walking out and never.
Yeah, my parents, I think people in those days, like there was lots of secrets. So my mother kept it a secret that she was getting married and that this other man was moving into our house. And then, we didn't know that when my biological father dropped us off, he didn't tell us he wasn't coming back. He just disappeared.
That had been hard. Did you ever get to reconnect with him then later?
Yeah, I talk about it in my book. So what happened is I was working at a tennis club. I was around 16, so I hadn't seen him for probably 10 years, 8, 10 years, somewhere in there. And I was working, I was partying, I was a high school kid living in New Jersey, and I was working at this tennis club. There was nobody else there. It was the 4th of July, and I heard a car, it's like, squealing like out of control, and the car hit a telephone pole about 50 feet or so from where I was working. And I ran. I mean, I was just a kid. I'd never seen a car crash. I didn't, was just totally out of my lane of familiarity, or for anybody. I mean, and I
Yeah.
ran, and the guy had hit the windshield and was unconscious, and I ran. I saw that, ran to the payphone. Back then, there was payphones to call the operator, call 911, whatever. And then, I mean, I was like living a dream, but it was sort of a nightmare. Like it happened, but it's like surreal. It's sometimes things happen so quickly, you're just not even sure it's really happening. But of course, it was. And
Yeah.
as I went back over, and the police and the ambulance came, and they had gotten the guy out of the car. They had him on the ground. His face was split in two. He's in bad shape. And I turned, and I was just going to ride away. And I felt that pull, like somebody was staring at me, and I turned, and he was I had him propped up against the car, and he was looking at me, and like I said, one of his eyes was very bloody, and he was certainly hurting. He was in bad shape. And the police officer took out his wallet and says, "Does anybody know this man?" And he said the name, and it was my biological father.
Wow, I just got goosebumps.
Yeah, yeah. So I got on my bike and I rode away, and I never told anybody that I was there until I was in my 40s. So I kept it a secret. I just buried it inside. I didn't really. I didn't. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I just, compartmentalization as a kid. You're just. I didn't. I couldn't talk to my brothers or sisters about it. It was just very, very bizarre. And my father's name had never come up for years. That we didn't really think about him because I was in this other situation and been adopted. But so that was my reunion. In fact, I write in the book, not the reunion that I had thought about. And that was pretty traumatic. And when I started talking about it, it kind of brought up some other things.
Well, so were you close to your dad, your biological
But
dad, before he left? And what kind of dad was he?
yeah, that's a great question. And the truth is, he was a veterinarian who worked, all the time, just starting his practice. So he was young, probably under 30, somewhere in there. He'd been in the army also, so maybe he's in his early 30s. And he didn't spend much time with us. I mean, he wasn't. He was great with animals, but not great with people. And, you might have even thought, today when I look back, he was probably on the spectrum in some way. But so I didn't have like a close relationship, but he was my dad. And he did take us for visitation, and he would take us to visit his parents. And so that it was a real shock. So we were close, as close as we can be to a person that's distant like that. And then, of course, this horrible man moves into my house who, was violent. And that was a big change. I was a quiet kid.
So how did that affect you when you had your dad, your biological dad, and then all of a sudden your mom brings this guy that you didn't even know she was getting married, brings all these other kids into the house, and then like you said, you were quiet and he was a violent man. How did that
Yeah.
affect you then?
I mean, it's what you look for in a house, of course, it's your
Yeah.
place of safety and security. And it was no longer safe. My friends wouldn't come to my house because nobody wanted to be around him. And he would fight. He would get in fights out in public. And so I was always on edge. I was always had a lot of anxiety, and just tried to stay out of the target zone. You just try to stay away from them. So part of what helped me is I would I was a big reader very early, and I would read books, and I would literally like hide there was a closet in the basement, and I would go down there with my books and read and just try to stay away. And he was tough, and he wanted us. We were boys. You got to be tough. So he taught us how to fight. Like he was pretty violent. He's pretty violent, and that in some ways that helped me later on. But it was not a secure, like, safe environment.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that would be like, especially because, like what you said, the boys, like, they're taught to be more tough. You got to be strong. You got to do all these things. And it's like, as a father, did that change how you parented then?
Oh, yeah, no, it definitely. Yeah, well, I realized, of course, that was wrong, and we weren't allowed to show
Yeah.
emotion. Boys don't cry, all those things. And so, yeah, I mean, I think when I became a dad, it made me a lot softer. I was pretty soft. I was pretty easy with my kids. All the kids have different personalities, and they're all doing really well, and I'm really proud of them. But I was probably too easy in some ways because I just knew instinctively it was really important to spend as much time as I could with my kids and not spoil them. But as a Florida person, I'm an outdoorsman. I do a lot of fishing. I go like hiking, going in the woods, and I would take my kids, spend a lot of time doing those things, and also athletics, coaching sports. And, I had two fathers, and they didn't spend 2 minutes with me. And that's probably pretty accurate. And
Yeah.
so spending time with my kids, my daughter's a cheerleader. She was a cheerleader, going to cheerleading events, all those things. So I spent as much time with them as I could.
Well, that's important. So it's like you were able to shift the family dynamic of what you had to deal with as a kid, but then you were able to shift it into positive, like, I'm never doing this to my kids. And like you
Right.
said, you were probably too easy, but
Right.
at the same time.
Right. And part of it too, and I
Yeah.
write a lot about, the mental health is a big topic these days, as it should be.
Yeah.
And I have a chapter in my book about, a visit I had with a therapist in New York. Excuse me. And because, I'd never talked about any of it. And I'd been married twice, and I just was having trouble in relationships. And I always had trouble because of like the intimacy thing. Like I was a great dad, and my exes will tell you, oh, Steve's a great guy, but he wasn't a great husband because he wasn't very emotional. I'm not a guy that would go drink and go like, screw around, but, I didn't
Yeah.
pay enough attention to their needs. And so I realized after my second divorce that I needed to
Yeah.
get some therapy and work through some of these things. And so I write a lot about that in my book because it was really helpful. And one of the things that the therapist took me through is, and this is pretty crazy. I went up to New York from Florida in February, so I was pretty desperate
Yeah.
to Albany, New York,
Yeah.
and it was
Especially in
really
winter.
cold. Yeah, it's winter, but this therapist she's highly specialized in this particular type of therapy. I can't
Yeah.
remember the exact name, but you basically spend like 6 to 8 hours, like in one day, with her, processing
Wow.
whatever it is that you're carrying around. And so I went there, and the first thing she said to me, uh, I sat down, and she said, "Are you nervous?" And I said, "No, I'm fine, because I'm cool." And she said, "Well, you're already lying." She said, "So if we're going to do anything today, we're going to get anything accomplished, you got to be transparent and you got to be honest. And I can see that you're anxious because your hands, what you're doing with your hands, and you're not looking me in the eye, and all these nonverbal things." And she was right. Of course,
Yeah.
I wasn't sure, and I was hiding within myself. And so after that, we had a really great conversation. And where it took us was, when I was in high school, right before my senior year of high school, my father, this is my father who adopted me,
Mhm.
he announced that we were moving to Florida from New Jersey. Now,
Yeah.
I had lived in New Jersey my entire life. I was a Jersey boy, and we were moving from the city, urban New Jersey, to Sarasota, Florida, which, and this is in the 70s, which at that time was, a lot of cattle farmers, as a farming community on the beach, but it's not like it is today. And and I had wanted no part of it. I mean, I'd spent my entire life in one place. I played sports, I did things. And so, against my will, we moved to Florida, all nine of us. And I didn't know a single person. I mean, it was my senior year of high school, and I was angry. And one day I came home from school, and he was standing there, and he didn't have a job, and so he would just wait for us, and bark out orders, and he's just nasty. And it's like an out of body experience. The mail came, and he wouldn't give me my driver's license, and he was, because like I hadn't taken the garbage out or something, and it's something
Yeah.
like that. And I remember we all standing around, and I just completely lost it, and I started fighting with him. And he had fought in the army. We had this really bad fight, and I punched him in the face, and I had him on the ground. And so during my therapies, we got to that. We started talking about it, and she took me through that fight because I'd never talked about it, not even with my family, even though they were there. It was never mentioned. And he wound up hospitalized. I had him around the neck, and I was squeezing him, and I got pulled off. And what the therapist pointed out to me was, the amount of anger you had, you probably would have killed him, because predators, lions, whatever, and they
Yeah.
they kill their prey by getting them around the neck, and that's where you had your hands. And so she's like, what she took me through, well, what would you have done if you had not been pulled off him? Would you have killed him? And what then if you had killed him, how would you have buried him? So I mean, she took me through this because I was carrying this anger inside me for so many years, and so that
Yeah.
really helped. It helped kind of clear my brain so I could like restart my engines. And by that time, I was a lawyer, practicing very successful practice, and I could use I used my anger to be a better lawyer. But I learned a lot from going through that process.
No, that's quite a lot though that you were able to like go through that process to really figure it out more. And then like you just said, is you used your anger as a tool to become a better lawyer. I think that's what kids today need is they need to
Yeah.
use their anger in a healthy way instead of a
Right.
way that
Yeah,
they're
recognize
currently.
you have it. I mean, listen, the kids today, a lot of anxiety, you know, living
Yeah.
through the pandemic, I think has affected everybody and still affects a lot of those kids, didn't go to school for a year and a half or whatever it was. And there's so many kids that have so much anxiety and they don't know what to do with it. And they either turn to self-medicating or alcohol or gambling, whatever it is. And so, I've really been out there talking to people saying, it's important to share your story. It's important to find somebody that you can talk to, whether it's a therapist or a priest or a rabbi or whatever. But don't carry it around. Don't carry it inside because it's a cancer.
Well, yeah, it definitely is, and it does lead to cancer. It leads to a lot of health problems. Like they've been able to prove that over the like over the years, they've proven like the body keeps score, and like there's so many amazing books out there that have proven like our bodies hold on to it, and that's where we get the sicknesses, we get the diseases, and the cancers, and all these things is from holding on to this stuff and not really expressing it. So
Right.
I'm also wondering, like with your biological dad, after he left, did he even seem like he struggled with that? Or I guess have you ever talked to him since that, outside of that, the accident that you'd seen?
So yeah, so later on, I wound up. I went to when I started college at Florida State in Tallahassee. I decided I wanted to go see him. Now he survived the accident. I knew that because he was a veterinarian and he had an office, but he really should have died right there because I found out he'd gotten like 250 stitches in his face and fractured his ribs and collapsed lung and just it was bad, really bad accident. And so when I went up to New Jersey to like just knock on his door and you'd say, hey, I'm your son, and what the heck, why what happened, and where did you go? And I wanted to confront him because he was a coward, felt like he was a coward. And so I went to New Jersey, knocked on his door. He didn't recognize me at first as his veterinary office, and then he realized who I was, and we developed a relationship. He was pretty much brain injured. He had a lot of medical issues. It turned out he had a drug problem. I never spoke to him about the accident, even though I talked to him about a lot of other things. I never actually brought the accident up. I think I was embarrassed or ashamed. I didn't know if he knew I had been there. I'm sure he didn't want to talk about it. So I didn't know if he knew that I knew because that I'd been there. So I never talked to him about it. And years, and I had a relationship with him, but he was not an easy man. He was not an easy man to get to know. He was really, he was overjoyed that I came and saw him. He was emotional, but another guy that just kept at a distance. And so I tried to maintain a relationship with him, and he wound up. He was in bad health, and he injected himself with morphine and did not recover. And so I never really sat down and had a, a great conversation with them. You see these Dateline stories and people make the reunions and that they make it like it's all happy, which is happy in that moment. But after that, you're two different people. And, he'd had some just major problems. So what winds up happening is I decided to go to his funeral. And when I went to his funeral, and there was hardly anybody there, I was approached by somebody who said, "Did you know that your father was a writer?" And I said, No, I mean, I knew he was a veterinarian, but this man said, well, I was his cousin, and he introduced himself, and it turned out he is a writer, and actually he's won some Emmy awards for his writing on like PBS, documentaries. And he said, your father was a writer. He was a great writer. And if you want, I could send you, you know, some of his work. So anyway, he winds up sending me these boxes with all, he wrote like short stories that were in like Esquire or Playboy or New York Times or like different magazines, but he also kept a journal of like every day in his life. He wrote down, he was crazy, but he wrote everything down that happened to him. And so, long story short, is I wound up going through these thousands of pages to see what I could find out about the accident, see what I could find out about what happened, and so I was able to learn a lot about him and what happened, and it turned out that he had hired an investigator, a private investigator, to find me and my brother and sister, and because he wasn't allowed to contact us, and he had asked my parents for pictures, and they said no. So he hired an investigator. The investigator figured out that I worked at these tennis courts, and so he got in the car. He went to his office. He took like 3 Valium or something. He took some pills, and he writes about it, and a couple of drinks, and gets in the car, and that drives by the tennis courts and hits the pole. And so,
That
pretty,
is just wow. Like that's
yeah,
that's a lot.
yeah, that's a lot. But that's why my book. I mean, I've gotten a lot of compliments. My book. I've gotten a lot of probably over 200 reviews so far. For a memoir, it's pretty good. And I incorporated his writing with mine. So, and he's a great writer. He's a great writer. He wrote some crazy stuff, but I matched the moments. Let's say, so that makes the book very unique. Also.
Well, no, that's a good thing. So I'm just like now I'm thinking about your book. I'm like that sounds so awesome. I'm just like the
Yeah.
where did you get the title? Pretend They Are Dead.
Pretend they're dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many layers to this to my story, which is still a story in practice in progress. Yeah, they pretend they're dead. That came from, and for anybody who are writing, thinking about writing out their title's so important. I spent hours trying to think about what to do, and one of the magazine articles that my biological father wrote that I didn't get until 40 years after he wrote it was he wrote an article about the last night he spent with his kids, like like the Last Supper or something. He wrote this very detailed article about how he had the three of us. It was his last visit with us, and how we didn't know, but he knew, and it's very sad. And he basically said that he had gone to a psychiatrist, and a psychiatrist said the best thing for you to do is to move on and pretend they're dead. Act like, just pretend your kids are gone and dead, and move on. And that was what he wrote. That's what he claimed the psychiatrist told him to do. And so that's where the title comes from. Pretend they are dead is it ruined his life. There's no doubt about it. And in the article, there's a picture of a man with his back to his 3 kids. So it's a unique title.
Well, yeah, definitely. And how do you think like that affected him? Like the
Oh,
psychiatrist telling him that.
well, I'm sure the way he wrote it was to protect himself, because it's hard to believe a psychiatrist would give that kind of advice, and maybe it was taken out of context, but that's how he wrote it. Oh, I
Yeah.
think it ruined him. I think he, because I have all his journals, it was pretty clear that he would drive by our house, you know, he was probably saw me 100 times over the years. I have no idea, because he never approached me, but it was pretty clear that we were on his mind all the time, and that it kind of destroyed him. And the thing that people don't
Yeah.
evaluate or analyze enough when they go through divorces is we didn't just lose him. We lost my grandparents. His father and his mother, who I was
Yeah.
very close to. Never saw them again. That was really sad, because I was very tight with my grandfather, and and that's what people, this estrangement concept. You hear that parental or
Yeah.
family estrangement, that causes damage in divorce, a lot of damage. And aside from, because you're not just divorcing your spouse, you're divorcing their family. And we try not to, but it's, that's how it was for me.
Well, no, and I can understand that one because it's like I'm I'm not the victim, I'm the thriver after my parents divorced too when I was 3. But it's still like to me, I've always looked at it as it puts more pressure on the children than the parents.
Sure.
Like the parents, like they don't. To me, I've never gone through divorce, but it's like I'm still married. Long story on my deal, but it's like it's harder on the kids
Oh
than the
yeah,
adults. And I've
absolutely.
like tried to explain it to people. I'm like, the kids, they can't handle it. The adults, they can handle it better because they typically know how to handle their emotions a little better. I don't know today's society though. Probably a toss up, which acts more mature. But I mean, like at the same time, it's like you seem to think the divorce does affect the children worse. Because, like you said,
Oh yeah,
you left your
yeah.
grandparents.
Yeah, no, and a lot, I think, depends on how old you are, when you get divorced,
Yeah.
because I was pretty young and I didn't have this great relationship with my father, but as the years went by and you have this other man in your house and he's not paying any attention to me, or any of the kids, for that matter, it wasn't just me. You miss that relationship.
Well, yeah, because at least your dad was there. Like your
Yeah.
biological dad was still there.
Right, right, right. Yeah, so it's very unique. It's a very unique story.
Well, yeah, very much so. So I also wanted to know, like, for you carrying, like, what's the secret about the tennis court for over 30 years? Didn't even tell your sister? Like, how, like, where are we at on, I'm in the story myself. Like, I want to know
Sure.
more.
Yeah, well, with that, I didn't tell anybody, and then I found out this is another part of the story that's just hard to believe, but it's true. I did a lot of research for my book, and I checked in with people from my past that I hadn't reached out for a number of years, and on the tennis court story, what he wrote in his journals was that he got a letter from the president of the tennis club saying that he needed to be paid because the telephone pole broke and it caused damage to the fencing at the court. And so the president of the tennis club threatened to sue him unless he paid for the damage. So the president of the tennis club, by the way, happened to be my adopted father. And so he's writing a letter to my biological father threatening that he's going to sue the court. They're going to sue him unless he
Yeah.
fixes the fence, which, there's so much wrong with that. I can't even, the fact that my adopted father knew that my biological father had been in this accident and he didn't say anything to me, just didn't think maybe I would want to know that, even though he didn't know I was there. So my biological father, he had, he'd been badly injured, couldn't drive from probably almost like a year after the accident. He got one of his employees to take him to the hardware store at night, and he got 3 letters, ASM, which is his initials, and they went to the tennis court and went to the telephone pole, and he was insistent on putting those letters on the pole, and which is and then left, and which is crazy to me. I just going, that is just crazy. And but that's what he did. So I actually, he wrote about doing that in his journals. So I found the woman at work for him, and I called and asked her about it, and she said absolutely 100%. He was bound and determined to put his name on that pole, like he owned that pole. And yeah, it was pretty crazy.
Well, yeah, that sounds like it. So it's like he almost like he wanted to be remembered at the same time.
Yeah,
Or
yeah. It's. I even got, I got a message from somebody that like a woman that I went was in like first grade with her or something, and she sent me a picture. She went to the tennis courts, and she with a copy of my book, and she sent me a picture in front of the tennis court sign, right by the pole, with my book in her hand. So she sent that to me, which was cool.
it's still there on that
I
on the
don't think
pole.
the letters aren't there, but I guess the poll is
Oh,
still there. She said she couldn't find the letters. She looked for them, but just that she went there and did that was kind of really pretty unique.
well, yeah, that is. So when did your book come out?
My book came out Father's Day, on Father's Day, so It's been out about 6 months now, and I've been able to try to share as much as I could with people, and get support from people, and try to help people who have reached out to me.
No, I love that because I'm just like thinking about your book too. At the same time, like everything that you've gone through. When you like, my thing is that I'm thinking like as a whole, like you've gone through so much. You've got this amazing book. The way it's it has to be a bestseller. I'm just saying that's awesome. And then it's like it just sounds like you've gone through so many things. There's a lot of that all encompassing in that book, like what we talked about. But then also, I'm really wondering like what point did it really like self-help get that different meaning for you?
I think it's kind of like I said earlier, when I was in Israel, I didn't want to spend my life as a victim. My brothers and sisters, some of them are still damaged, really damaged. I mean, there's a lot of physical stuff in our house, and I never, I didn't, I minded the physical, but back then it wasn't uncommon for fathers to take the belt out, or it's just we may have had a little bit different kind of violence, but it was the emotional part, him calling me a loser, telling me I'd never do anything with my life, and all those things. So I recognized, when I was in Israel and I was by myself, I went there on my own, and I would work out in the fields, and I recognized, you got to do it, man. I can't, I don't want to spend my life like feeling sorry for myself, and I don't want anybody feeling sorry for me. I can do this myself. And that's kind of what kicked in.
Well, yeah, that helps because I'm also wondering, like, and at the same time, when you're writing this book, how long did it take you to write that? To
Uh,
through that?
I,
Because you said you did research too.
I worked on the book for like 10 years. I worked on it for almost 10 years. I mean, I took some breaks, but I'm a full-time lawyer, trial lawyer, so I'm busy. And so finding time to do it, I approached it like I do running. I used to run marathons. I get up early. I would write every morning from like 5 to 7:30, and then go to work. So, but I love writing. I enjoy it, and it's been really satisfying to hear people talk about, "Oh, Steve, you're a good writer." I like hearing that because I have a little imposter syndrome.
Well, I know there's a lot of people that have it, and I'm like, I've never struggled with that, which is a good thing. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm like, that's a good thing that you have that ability to write. Because I'm also wondering, like, if that was helpful for you to heal from everything that
Oh
you've
yeah.
experienced too. Like, I guess that's my next question is how healing was that for you to write this, to get this out there?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Very, any journaling, of course, there's a reason that, therapists talk about journaling and just putting stuff down on paper. And yeah, it was healing. It was kind of fun because you have to go back through there's a purpose for you, like thinking about your past, and there's people you remember, or events that you'd forgotten about for many years, and then all of a sudden you remember it. And so it was definitely a great experience and definitely helpful.
So do you think you're gonna write another one after this one? Or not quite
Uh,
yet?
no, I'm already working on another one, but it'll be a it'll be a little bit different. But I've had a lot of experiences and met some incredible people as a lawyer, and people with personalities, and there's some really interesting stories. So I'm gonna put those together for another book.
Well, I suppose as a lawyer, you'd meet quite a lot of different, quite interesting people. I'm like,
Yes.
that was one of those things I wanted to be when I was growing up. Like when you get to, at least when I was growing up, I'll be 40 next week. But
Happy birthday.
thank you. And my thing is I'm thinking, I remember like all the different things I wanted to be when I was growing up. And then it's like a lawyer was one of them. And then I'm like, I was told all the things. And I'm like, I don't know how much of that is actually true for some of the things. But, we've all needed lawyers at one point or another in our life. So I'm just wondering, like, what's the best way our audience can get in contact with you, especially about your book?
Yeah, I mean the best way, and hopefully you'll leave it in the notes, is
Yes, I will.
I have a website that's www.stevenscotteichenblatt.com. The book is called Pretend They Are Dead, and so you can get it on Amazon. And, so that's probably the easiest. Those are the easiest ways. I have a law firm called Page and Eichenblatt. I'm in Orlando, Florida. Not a lot of Eichenblatts in Orlando, but, and I'm happy to talk with anybody or share my story if I can help. I've been invited to speak at a bunch of book conferences and speaking to therapists about my experience, and happy to help anybody I can.
Awesome. So I appreciate it so much, and I'm sure our audience does as well. So I'm just so amazed. Can people find your book on Amazon then too, like Amazon, Barnes and
Yes.
Noble?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Amazon. Absolutely. Pretend They Are Dead on Amazon.
awesome.
Great. Well, thank you for having me today, Robin.
Yes, and thank you for being a guest. I really appreciate it. I really truly do.
As always, I just want to thank you for your time and energy while listening to today's episode of Healing for the Soul podcast. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Healing for the Soul podcast wherever you get your downloads, you're listening to your podcasts, and keep coming back for more episodes. Thank you, everyone, for your time and your energy while listening to today's episode of Healing for the Soul podcast, which also can be found on YouTube.